Now, we're standing in the oldest part of the Brown Brothers winery, and I believe it's called the Canadian Barn, built by a Scotsman in the middle of Australia. Guys, how did this come about?
History tells us that our first grapes were planted in 1889, and this was where the wine was first made. This was the most prominent building on the property, and it seems that this was the starting place for Brown Brothers Winery in this building. And it wasn't until in the turn of the century that the main winery was built, and that became the sort of the recognisable design of the Brown Brothers Winery.
And when we look at the wines you produce today, what are we looking at in terms of varietals now that are very important for Brown Brothers?
Well, we've had the traditional wines like Chardonnay, Cabernet, Shiraz, Merlot, but our most recent developments have been the new grape varieties and wines like Vermentino, Siena, Moscato, Dolcetto, and varieties that we've really pioneered. And most recently, Pinot Grigio has become very successful as well.
And talking about the new, as possibly the other end of the spectrum from where we're standing today is your kindergarten operation, where I believe you develop new wines and new varietals.
Yes, well, that was built to celebrate our 100 years of winemaking in 1889, and it was done out of the heart as a great idea to have a vision for the future of the industry and of Brown Brothers. 20 years later, we look back and say, well, what a great idea that was, because it actually has put us on the front foot and has really put us in a leadership position in the Australian wine industry and being first to market with a lot of new varieties.
Yeah. It's really important to have a place where you can play around with different varieties that doesn't interfere with the main production. If you've got little bits and pieces of grapes coming in of new varieties or with trials from vineyards, and they get put aside for half a day while you do your main production, they spoil and you've lost that year's experience. So it's really good to have a dedicated site where you can handle that fruit in ideal conditions and really get the best out of it and find out what it can do for you.
Is it fair to say now that you're seeing more and more consumers around the world looking for lighter varietals perhaps?
And some low alcohol wines with lower alcohol, and we're finding we're able to produce some wines here sort of 8-9% alcohol, which is wines like the Siena, which is becoming very successful for us, is only 6% alcohol. And this allows us to tap into a whole new spectrum of wine drinkers and customer tastes.
And what have we got for us here today?
Well, you'll have to ask Catherine, because she's working here.
It's one of our new varieties we're looking at, which is the Carmenere.
Carmenere.
This had a long history in Chile, and we think this is one of the very first Carmeneres to be grown in Australia. And we're pretty impressed because it's really got such good depth of colour.
Beautiful colour, isn't it? Yeah, we can capture that on the camera, but it really is a beautiful, quite distinctive colour, this Carmenere grape. Ross, we're sitting in a marvellous restaurant experience here. What's the background to this Epicurean Centre? How did it come about?
At Brown Brothers, we've always recognised that wine and food is a package that is at its best when they're together. We started with the wines and matched the food with the wines, and it's a little bit of a different concept that we have the chef create the food around the wines we want to showcase for that season. And so we do a lot of tasting, a lot of working out which exactly the texture and flavours are going to work.
As you can see, we're enjoying some of the wonderful hospitality here at Brown Brothers, and we're enjoying a particularly fine wine known as Patricia. Can you tell us how this is one of your family members?
And Mum involved herself in the background most of the time, but she was the doer around the place. She was a great mum. She did all the things she needed to do to raise 4 boys, of all things, which must have been quite a task. But her love of food and wine always shone through, and in her later years we were looking for a name to call our top flight wine, our very best wine. When we called Mum into the boardroom on the day to advise her that we're planning to do, she had a bit of a tear in her eye and she said, well, it better be bloody good.
What are the things that have remained consistent, Ross and John, throughout that period, that 120 years?
Well, I think the very things you mentioned are what's consistent is innovation and times of change, and that keeps work interesting. And with the relationships we build with our staff and our customers, we're able to talk about that innovation and consistency all the time, and it makes it a great place to work.
Yeah.
And those relationships are fantastically important, and the relationship between the family has been very, very solid, and we've been able to grow the business with a very single, clear passion into the future. And those staff are like a family within the family.